Welcome to another edition of Monocle Spade, and I'm your host, Ted Wright. I want to thank you so much for joining with us today. We have got a really cool podcast for you today, a really great show with a very special guest. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. But those of you who have been following us know that I have been basically saying that I'm going to get a monocle for at least the last couple of podcasts. Well, guess what, guys? I got the monocle, and here it is. So I got to put it on, and monocles are pretty cool. And I got to say, it just makes you look like a mad, angry archaeologist when you wear it. You have to kind of scrunch your eye up a little bit, but it works. It works when it stays in your eye. So anyway, I got the monocle, and I will be wearing it on occasion when I want to look like an old 19th century archaeologist. But anyway, thank you guys for coming on board with us today. This is, again, the podcast of Monocle and Spade, the podcast of epic archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. And on today's show, we've got a really amazing guest. I actually learned about Dan's work several years ago when I was a seminary professor in North Carolina. A friend of mine had his book called Quranic Geography. And we had with us today Mr. Dan Gibson, who is a historian, and he has lived in the Middle East for many years. And he has researched some really amazing things about early Islam. And so, first of all, I just want to, Dan, welcome you to the program. Thank you for being on today.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
And Dan and I were talking earlier. He is just our northern neighbor up into Canada, and so we were discussing about the nice balmy weather that we both experience here in me in Chicago, and then him in Canada. But I think he's got me beat with the cold weather. But
we're closer to the North Pole.
That's right. He's probably got reindeer running through his backyard right now. But anyway, Dan. So first, let me ask you. A little bit about your background and how, before we get into that, let me just say this. Today, for those of you who don't know what we're going to talk about the history and the archaeology of early Islam. It's specifically about mosque, and which are the places of worship for Muslims. In fact, Islam is the second largest religion in the world, and at least 3 times a day. I think the Quran states it should be 5 times a day, right, Dan?
It depends if you're Shia or Sunni.
Okay. Pray toward Mecca. They bow down on their prayer carpet and they pray toward Mecca. So we're going to talk about that in today with Dan and what he discovered in his research. And it was actually he wasn't going looking for this information. He just happened to discover this interesting historical fact that anybody can research. But Dan, first of all, thank you. And tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in this subject.
I grew up being interested in the Middle East. My father and my grandfather were fascinated with the Middle East. So my grandfather going back into the 1800s, my father as well, in the early 1900s. And so we had an amazing library in our home, and they subscribed to all the journals at the time. There weren't a lot of them, but there were a lot. So they got all the information. And my dad was on a search for different things in the Bible that he was looking for. He was always looking for Tarsus because everybody wonders where it was. And those are the kinds of questions going around back in the 1930s, 1940s. So when I came along, I inherited this love for archaeology and the adventure of finding things, discovering things, putting things together using manuscripts. And so really, I am a historian. I study the manuscripts. And I'm not an archaeologist. Archaeologist goes out with, and gets himself dusty and dirty. Now, that doesn't mean I don't visit the sites. One of the advantages I have, and these days, is we can go out and actually go to these places and look at them and check them out, where back in the 1940s, to get on a boat and to travel across the world and to get out in the desert was a huge undertaking. And so I was the first one in my family who was able to actually do that. I was 20 years old when I arrived, well, 21, I guess, when I arrived in the Middle East. And I spent a couple of years studying Arabic. And then I started going around to the various places to see what they were and what they looked like. And I had to fund myself in many ways, so I was would work at the same time at different things. And when I had enough money, then I put that aside, and my wife and I were just together, the two of us, and we just started out going to all these different places, investigating and checking things out. And that was just my passion over the first quite a few years that we were there. And my real interest as well, though, was studying culture and worldview. You know, what is the Arab mindset? How do they think? How do people in the Middle East, what goes through their head? What comes first? What are their gut reactions? And so yeah, at the very beginning, I sort of avoided history because I loved it so much. I knew I'd get trapped in it once I started. So I was looking more at the history of people. Eventually, we moved out and lived with Bedouin out in the desert. And just to learn and understand, and I wanted to take that understanding of the Middle Eastern mindset and what people think, and take it back to understand the manuscripts I was reading, to understand the history that I was looking into, because people in North America think very differently from people in the Middle East. So that was my background. It was more coming out of a study of sociology, and then this guy, working my way into history. Eventually, I got trapped into history. I mean, right from the very beginning, because I loved history, there was a man there who used to be an archaeologist, and he had then became a pastor in one of the churches. And so he was busy all the time, but he had a lot of friends who were archaeologists and historians and teachers in colleges and seminaries. And whenever they came out, he would come and say, Dan, here's the keys to my car. Please take them to the places they want to go. So inevitably, I visited Jerash. I visited many of the places that were there. And Petra, everybody wanted to go see Petra.
Yes.
And so I took these fascinating people to these sites. I remember taking a guy whose expertise, who had written all his papers and things on Baal worship. And I took him around to high places and showed him all the various high places. It was a fascinating trip. So I was, even though at the very beginning, I wasn't directly involved in all this, I was just like osmosis, picking all this stuff up, and became sort of the go-to tour guide for a lot of these visiting people, scholars who were coming, who wanted to get places. And the word was out, just go talk to Dan and Dan will get you into there. And so that was sort of my beginning at the beginning. I recognized the importance of Nabataean studies in all of this. The Nabataeans are key to understanding a lot of the Middle East. I mean, if you even to understand the Apostle Paul, if you don't have a grasp of the Nabataeans, you don't have an understanding. The Nabataeans were in control of Damascus. And so Paul, when he wanted to go to Damascus up there to persecute the Christians, had to get letters of permission from King Aretas and from the governor there before he could go to Damascus. And so King Aretas, king of the Nabataeans. And so these Nabataeans, they're there in the history of the Bible, there in the history of the Middle East. And so I began to focus more and more on who are these Nabataeans. So in the year 2000, I signed a contract. I created my own little business, and I signed a contract with the Ministry of Tourism in Jordan and the Ministry of Antiquities. And the project I put forward was that I would take what the archaeologists were writing up, all of their reports, and I would rewrite a lot of this material, but for the tourists, because people were taking beautiful pictures of Petra, but to find accurate information was very difficult for the tourist who doesn't have access to journals. Yes. And so I just thought this would be a nice way to bridge that gap. And so I spent quite a bit of time putting together projects, and every year a major project with the Ministry of Tourism to produce a new product, which my little company would then produce the product, books and different things, and then market those to the tourists who are coming. And so that was one of my ways of combining my love of history with earning some money and being there. So that gave me my focus on the Nabataean people. And I created this bridge. And during that time, I stumbled across something that I didn't know existed. I mean, I had put a picture up on my website. One of the projects was to produce this website. It's called Nabataea.net. We'll put it on the screen later so you can see it. But one of them, I had a picture up of a camel scratched on the side of a mountain. It's several stories tall. This great big flat side of the cliff, and there's a camel scratched, a big picture of a camel on it. And a man wrote to me, and he was writing with the Muslim Free Thinkers. I think it's muslimfreethinkers.org. But he said to me, he said, "Can I use that picture on my website? Because that's the great camel of Thamud." And I'm like, what? You know? So he introduced this idea to me, and it had been floating around that Islam had its beginnings in northern Arabia. He said that should be near Mecca. What's it doing in southern Jordan? And so that's the first time I really got introduced, and my eyes sort of switched over to early Islamic period, because that was after. And I began to realize there was a huge gap. I understood.
Let me interrupt you at this point, just
Yep.
for our listeners. This camel that you saw, that you took a picture of, was actually in Jordan.
Yes.
But this guy was saying that it should be in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca.
That's right.
And so you were like,
close to Mecca.
And you were like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
That's right. So now that was sort of the eye-opening, and then I stumbled across Dr. Crone, Patricia Crone, and others who had proposed this in some of their papers, and this idea was around. And it just sat in the back of my mind, and I was thinking, wrestling this through, could it actually be true? And I realized I knew history from, everything from the Babylonians and Egyptians and the Jewish history and all this kinds of stuff that we read and work through. But the leap to Islamic history, because Islam, we know, going back, it works back to the time of Jahiliyyah, which means the time of ignorance before Muhammad. And I couldn't put the two together, because I ended up with the Nabataean kingdom, and I end up here with these guys in the desert, and it's just all, there's nothing there. And it's like, there's a gap in the history here, and I don't know how to put that together. And I'd always tell people, I can't put it together. Well, one time, I shouldn't tell stories. I like to tell stories. I was in England, not England. I was actually in Europe in a college, and I was teaching a course, and I had brought nothing to do in the afternoon, and I just rushed to get there. And so I went down to the library, and I found the book, The Life of Muhammad by Gulamin, and however you say his name, the French guy. And I thought it's a big, thick book. And I thought, I'm going to read this, but I'm going to read it with a Northern Arabia, like a Jordanian thinking of where this took place. And as I began to read through that in the afternoons, couple hours every afternoon, suddenly I realized it makes far more sense geographically if this whole story took place farther north. Because when the armies leave Medina going to Mecca, they go north. It tells us that. They leave out of the north side of the city. And I'm like, what? They should be going out of the south. So that, I then went around for a couple of years telling people, there's something going on here. And it wasn't until about 2009 that a man begged me, literally with tears. He said, you've got to study this out. Nobody's looking into this gap, and you're the only guy who's been, just sort of piddling away at it over the years, trying to put this story together. And so that's when, in 2010, I took a sabbatical and said, and I'm still on that sabbatical. I'm still pursuing this now full time.
Thank you for that. And let me, at this point, interject. And I'm sorry to interrupt you here.
No, that's fine.
For our listeners, just so they can follow along with us, those of you who are tuning in, listening to this, what we're talking about here, what Dan and I are discussing, what he's really kind of laying out about and talking, and what he's going to get into is the earliest history of Islam, when Muhammad, the prophet, the founder of Islam, it's understood, Dan, typically in an understanding of Islamic history, that he was born in Mecca, correct?
Yep.
And that is in Saudi Arabia. And so the things that you're reading, you're getting clues now. You're starting to read like the life of Muhammad, and you're seeing that this the geography doesn't fit with Saudi Arabia. And so some questions are being raised in your mind as to why this is the case. So for those of you who don't know a lot about Islamic history, Dan, could you kind of give us just a real thumbnail sketch of the just Islamic, like how Muhammad, what the typical understanding of where Muhammad was born? You may get into that later, but just get to just a real quick sketch of that.
Well, he was born in the city of Mecca, and Mecca in the Hadiths. The Hadiths are the things that are written about Muhammad by the next generation, and then following. I mean, things that were said in the following generations after Muhammad. Generally, the next few years, it's the stories that people remembered what was said back then. And so they describe Mecca as this great city. It's a city with all kinds of merchants coming and going. It's a story of Muhammad was there. There are Christians there because his cousin is a Christian and other people. And he gets his revelation there. And after a while, he starts preaching about there's only one God. Persecution comes on it. So then he has to flee to Medina, and the city of Medina, and that's really where Islam blossoms. He has only a handful of people who go to Medina with him, but there it becomes the religion of the city, and eventually they form a state, a government. It becomes the religion of the government, and Islam expands from there. So there's two places in mind here. Mecca, it starts with. Medina is where it actually expands and becomes a worldwide religion and an empire that grows out of that as well. So that's the traditional account. Now, I just want to interject here. The problem when you come up with a new idea, a revision, and people talk about these revisionists who come along and want to revise the way traditional people understand things. The problem with that is if you're a revisionist, you have to address very wide areas. I meet people who say, oh, I've got this idea that this, and I'm like, well, you can't suggest that because you didn't consider this other thing and this thing and that. You have to have a big picture view before you can revise things. It's like the old sci-fi movies. You go back and make one change in history back even in the 1950s, if you're watching something, and then the ripple goes all the way through history. So if a historian makes a change, the ripple goes all the way down, and you've got to account for all of the ripples. So it's not an easy thing. And I meet people who just sort of throw out ideas, and I'm like, no, stop. Go back and start doing your history check, because I'm not here to check your revisionist. I'm here to check my revision theory, and I can't check yours because I know that will take you 10 to 20 years to go through everything. And so after I came up with this, some of these ideas, I had to begin to read all the stories again, all the manuscripts again, go through the Quran, go through all the hadiths, go through all the histories. That's why these books are on my shelf. That's why I have an electronic library of 20,000 plus books on a CD here that I've been collecting and going through. So I can check the histories, because it's a huge thing to come up with a new, revisionist in history, even if it's a small thing. And for me, it was one geographical change, but it affects so many other things, and I have to check all those angles. Now, if they all start supporting, then you get encouraged. I'm on the right track. And so, but if you find something that just absolutely destroys what you're doing, your revision, you got to put your revisionist thing aside, because sorry, you can't make it fit. And so this is where a lot of historians struggle with what I'm doing, because they haven't taken the time to read the books or to look at the videos, to check it out, to see I really am trying to make it fit in the big picture.
So Dan, let's just cut to the chase. What exactly was it that you discovered? What was the big bombshell, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you discovered that you began to see it sort of like a slowly developing picture? And as it began to get sharper into focus, it really pinpointed something that was really fascinating. What was that one thing? It was something about the Islamic.
I can give you the time as well. It was the fall of 2010. Excuse me. I started as my sabbatical. I thought I've done all this research. I've done more than 20, 30 years of research by that time. Not full time. You know, you're sort of piddling away, but building this picture over the years. Every site you visit, everybody you talk to, different people, you know, that puts another, you know, a little bit together. But at this point, 2010 September, I thought, okay, I'm doing my sabbatical. I'm going to write this up. And I thought I'm writing a conspiracy theory is sort of what I'm writing. And by December, I remembered in December going to my wife and I said, this is not a conspiracy theory. All of the evidence is fitting together. And I was working 10, 12 hours a day at this, you know, like 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. I mean, after church, I'd come home. My problem was sitting in church and trying not to think about this and follow the sermon because it was just, I mean, my mind was just absorbed in this. And I started really writing it all out in, you know, in January. But I mean, at that point, thought, I've got enough evidence now. Everything points in the right direction. That was when I was writing the book, Chronic Geography. But I'd like to go to the PowerPoint because
Sure.
I think the first thing we need to do is some vocabulary and just so people understand. So let's see if I can figure out how to do this.
Sure. We'll let him transition to the PowerPoint, and this will start to make much more sense. Because what we're going to get into is early Islamic history and a major change that took place in Islamic history that may have some big implications for people who follow people who are Muslim.
Right. Now I have a message on my screen that says host has disabled screen sharing.
Okay, let me enable you. There we go. Try it again.
Aha.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
You now have all the power.
I now have all the power. I just make sure I know how to do this. I am not clever with some of these things. Where is Zoom? Oops. I will have to hit escape. We'll figure this out here. Sorry.
No worries.
Are you seeing something?
There you go.
There we go. Sorry, there we are. Vocabulary.
There you go.
Okay, the first word we want to learn is the word Qibla. This is an Arabic word, but it's the basis of the whole thing that we're going to look at. In Surah chapter 2, this is in the Quran, you're listening, this is God speaking, and we appointed the Qibla, which you formerly observed, only that we might know who follows the messenger from him who turns on his heels. In truth, it was a hard task, save for those whom Allah guided. We have seen the turning of your face to heaven. That would be like in prayer when you pray. Now we shall make you turn towards a Qibla, which is dear to you. So turn your face towards Masjid al-Haram. Wherever you may be, turn your faces towards it. Now, this is the word Qibla is introduced to us here. It's not something that we find in the Christianity or in Judaism. We don't have a Qibla. That is, when you pray, you don't necessarily have to turn your face in any direction. We don't have this idea of a sacred direction. Now, Solomon talked about whenever anyone prays and turns their face towards this temple. And so we have an idea that some Jews did that. We know Daniel did that, but we don't have any command anywhere that Jews need to pray in any direction. Most Christian churches, early churches, had faced east, graveyards face east and so forth. So there's something about Christians and the east, because Christ is going to return and come back in the east, I suppose. But in Islam, they have this very powerful thing called a Qibla, and that means that is the sacred direction. So when you pray, you have to turn your face to something called Masjid al-Haram. That's a place, and so you're supposed to turn there when you pray. When you go on pilgrimage, you go to Masjid al-Haram. That's a place that you go towards. when a Muslim kills an animal to eat it, he faces the animal towards, the face faces towards the Qibla direction, this Qibla towards Masjid al-Haram, and then the animal's throat is slit and it is killed. That then, therefore it is, and it's done in the name of Allah, therefore it is halal. And so that makes it, so this has a lot to do with it. So the word Qibla is the direction that you face when you pray. So the second thing we want to catch is the Qibla Wall. So in a mosque, when you go into a mosque, usually it's the wall opposite the door, but it doesn't always have to be. But there is a long wall. So I mean, when a man goes in, or a woman, they go in, they wash themselves. It's a ritual purification, because you need to be clean in order to pray to God. And then they line up. You see that center picture? They're lined up facing the Qibla Wall, and you see they get in a long line. They believe that shoulder should touch shoulder. So many of these rooms, the first mosque buildings were, some of them were very long and very narrow, because they just had a Qibla wall that they faced. And so the challenge is to figure out what direction were they praying, and especially in the first 100 years of Islam. Then the mihrab niche came, and there was a time when there was a lot of confusion. What direction do we face? Because there were several qiblas that were going on. We're going to look at that. And so they came up with the idea of hanging a sign on a wall. And so there might be different signs in different directions. There are some mosques that have two qiblas in them, one on that way and one over on this side. And so the niche was, and you'll see it on the right hand side, there's a pulpit going up into the air. The guy can get up very high and preach, but beside him there's that niche in the wall, that curved niche, and that tells you that's the Qibla wall. And so that's the wall you line up against. So when archaeologists are out digging and they come across a niche in the wall, they go, aha, this is a place of prayer, and we can tell it by that niche in the wall. So those are the concepts you need to get, because what I was looking at was as I began my studies, was trying to find out what direction did they first pray in. So let me switch slides here. So 2009, 2010, I was writing Quranic geography, and I understood that the Qibla should be either to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, or they should be praying towards Jerusalem, because that's what Islamic historians tell us. When Muhammad moved to Medina, he prayed towards Jerusalem for the first 16 months or so. And then he got a command, this one that we just read, now turn your face towards Masjid al-Haram. And so all the Muslims turned around in the middle of one service. They got the command, they turned around and they faced Masjid al-Haram, Mecca in Saudi Arabia. That's the traditional account. So I should be able to find, as I'm going around, because for years before this, I have visited not only Jewish sites and Babylonian sites and Egyptian sites. I've visited Muslim sites as well, and gone to these early mosques. And so I was putting them together, and I felt I should be able to find a mosque or two from that very first 16 months that faced to Jerusalem. And so that's when the big surprise came, when I started to do my research. Now, how many mosques do you think I found face Jerusalem? The answer is 0. Wow. I didn't find any. And in fact, how many did I find that faced Mecca? The answer is 0. I didn't find any. And wow. So this was the big shocker that took place. So just a quick timeline of what happened. Quranic Geography, published in 2010. There's 30 mosques in that book. And that book's still available. We're still selling it out to people. It just got a little bit at the end, really, about the mosque. It's the last third of the book. The rest of it is looking at what is the geography behind the Quran. Then in 2016, we put out a documentary film. This is a full feature documentary film about this. You can watch it in America on Amazon Prime. You can go there and hunt for this documentary film, The Sacred City. You can look for it on YouTube. Finding in English, there are some English copies there full of adverts. But it's also there in 16 other languages, so you can look at it in whatever different, and it's more languages are coming out slowly
Very cool.
over time. Then in 2000, later in 2016, because there's a 4-year gap here. The film took several years to make, so it wasn't a fast thing. It was a whole year in editing and putting it together. Low budget, but high quality. The people who worked on the film had all worked on BBC documentary productions, so they had they were able and quality people to do things. But because we had low budget, it got spread out over time because people are helping and volunteering and so forth. So it's a high quality film. The book came out, though it had 64 mosques, and see, it's grown over time because I keep finding more mosques. Now when I say mosques, these are mosques in the first 1 or 2 centuries of Islam, and so it had grown to 64. Then I started YouTube videos, and I have a YouTube channel. You just go on YouTube and type in Dan Gibson Islam or something, or Mecca or whatever, and you'll find me there. And in 2017, I invited the audience to help me look for mosques, especially the Muslims. I said, go find ruins in your hometown and go check them and see where they face, and then email me back and tell me what you found. And so everybody started out scouring all over the place trying to find these things, and lots of people came on and were excited in the chase. The more eyes you have, the better it is. I didn't have enough eyes to get everywhere in every place. So in 2020, just in the last, in December, I have an academic repository, and I put there a list of 160 mosques, about 140 of them from the first 2 centuries of Islam, and then some other important ones that follow afterwards. And now, just in the last month, I've added 3 more very important mosques. So
these mosques that you're talking about, now listed at 163, these are all mosques in the earliest years of Islam that do not point to Mecca. They point to somewhere else. Is that
somewhere else? Well, yeah, in the first 100 years of Islam, they point somewhere else.
Okay.
The earliest mosque I can find that faces Mecca, it comes after 100 years of Islamic history.
Wow.
So what is important here is that okay, I'll just give you a picture. Here's and we're going to look at the Qibla tool in a while. This is a tool we've put up on the internet, but there are basically the mosques and the directions that they face.
Wow.
And so we'll go through that, but and we'll give you the link to where it takes place. But the data, we've tried to make it all very easily accessible so you can digest it and search it. Now, the whole thing hinges on the study of these mosques. I just need to emphasize this because we get into circumstantial evidence. So in the book, Early Islamic Qiblas, I mean, we cover all the mosques, and then we look at 50 supporting things from other manuscripts or from other sites, and from, and people get caught up in the circumstantial evidence, weighing it out and trying to debate it. And they maybe get one and say, wow, that might not really be true, and pulling one out. And so we can have that discussion, but the whole thing is based on 160 mosques in the database. And so, yes, you can argue something, but when you see patterns of 30 mosques all pointed this way for over a 60-year period, and then nobody did that anymore, and now mosques are, something's going on there. And so the circumstantial evidence shouldn't distract us, and we're not even going to talk about circumstantial evidence. There's the problem that people get so caught up in it. And so the thing is, archaeology tells the story, and that's why we're on this show.
That's right.
The stones, you go to the actual site, you look at the building, and that's where you have to start from. And as a historian, I can't just come up with a theory. I have to start with the archaeology first. And does that show me where I'm going? Now I can go and start reading the manuscripts and throwing out some ideas and suggestions and various things. But the proof is not on which professor says this or which professor says that. If that's what it comes down to, there's really, the arguments are baseless because they're just opinion versus opinion.
That's right.
It's got to be based in archaeology, going and looking at the stones and putting the whole thing together. Okay, what did I learn? I learned trust the rocks and stones. Okay, because they're there and we can look at them. Now, there's questions maybe of dating and there's questions of interpretation, but they're there. That's the basis. The thing is, never trust the media. Just an example from the last couple of weeks. Here's
That's
a
shocking,
headline.
man. That's just absolutely shocking to not trust the media.
This is one I did that just came out in the last couple, within the last month or two. One of the world's oldest mosques found in Tiberias in Israel, beneath the city's ancient mosque. There's actually an older one underneath, okay? Because, and this is quite common in the Middle East, there's various places. And the one underneath, I'm waiting because they did it through, I think they did it through ground-based radar and went through the mosque because they dug a trench and found something was underneath the mosque. I'm waiting to see where that mosque is oriented to. I can almost tell them right now where I think it will be based on the time period and what was going on based on all the other mosques of that time period. It is not the world's oldest mosque. It doesn't even come close to fitting in the world's oldest mosque. It will be interesting to see what they come up with. But the news media throws these things up, and I remember that they throwing up, one mosque. This was a year or so ago, and I looked at the first picture I looked at, and I said, "That's not the world's oldest mosque because it has a mihrab niche. That niche that's there, that wasn't invented until 100 years after the founding of Islam." And the problem is some of the archaeologists, they know it's a mosque or a place of prayer when they see the mihrab niche. That's what they're looking for. When
Yes.
they see a square building and there's no niche, they don't know if it's a place of prayer or not. The difference is I look at it and there's several tests we look at to figure out where was the place of prayer, and orientation is one of them. And so so we have to go through that. So be careful when the media tells you something. And so, yeah, here's that. They forget that the mihrab niche was invented in 705. We have that date down, but yet the birth of Muhammad is 570. So it's quite a bit earlier. There's some time in between there. And so they fail to recognize Qiblas. And so just we mentioned, if you come to any of my sites, you'll see there has been some resistance to my findings. And the reason is if I'm rewriting history, and that affects thousands of academic papers that have been written all around the world. People who have written all kinds of things on the context of the Quran, placing it in Mecca and Saudi Arabia. Now I'm saying Mecca and Saudi Arabia is not where Islam was founded because none of the mosques face in that direction. They're all facing in another place. And when I go there, I have 50 circumstantial evidence that all point to that place as well. And so I'm building this case, but it is very hard for the archaeologists and historians to swallow because everyone has already decided that something has taken place. There's a term that they use for this, and it's slipping out of my head now. When everybody, the consensus is all this, and so they keep talking about. Pardon me.
Scholarly consensus.
Scholarly consensus says this, and I come along and contradict it, and they are not happy. So don't expect to find people who are happy with what I'm finding, because scholarly consensus was decided on some of these things a century ago or more, and now I've come along and pulled the rug out. Now the whole house of cards is either going to fall down, or you just say it hasn't fallen down, consensus still stands.
Well,
So
I don't think
that's where it's at.
Yeah, I don't put a lot of stock in scholarly consensus, as you know. There's most archaeologists today working in the Near East don't believe in the Exodus. They don't believe in the conquest. They don't believe that Israel was historical, or at least they have very little. So I'm just really heartbroken as to the whole, not just in America, but in Europe as well, how it's become so closed-minded. And even the history of science, Dan, as you know, there have been many great breakthroughs that went against the scholarly consensus, like Galileo, and many of the great thinkers, even Albert Einstein, his ideas were just radical. But it's really sad to see so many people being closed-minded, because if they would just look at the evidence itself and test without just completely dismissing it ad hoc or post hoc, just look at it and look, see if there's any evidence there. So
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's one of the things that being a Christian and believing in the Bible as the Word of God and having a personal experience with God, I'm fixed on. This is a truth that I know I've discovered in my life, and it goes against all this consensus that's out there. And so we have this built-in sort of skepticism of scholarly consensus. Sometimes it's right on and it's very good, but at other times it might be built on, this, and this is one of the problems. And I read a lot of papers. People have these scholarly papers and they quote other scholars all the way through it. Mm-hmm. And I think when they get down to the end, they realize they haven't dealt with any source material.
Yeah.
And so that's why for many years, I have been digging in the source material. Been digging in with what it was written. I'm very interested when a new manuscript shows up. The Petra Scrolls, when they showed up, I have the books, they're right behind me here. You can't see them, but the full set of all pictures of all of the scrolls and all the bits and all the in it, and everything, because that's very important, because those were written during the lifetime of Muhammad. And so this is something right from his lifetime, although they're in the city of Petra, but we're going to get to that. But anyway, so going back to source material is far more important than quoting some professor's opinion that was maybe agreed on or, just mimicked by somebody else.
Let me interject here, Dan, and you touched on something that we, those of you who have been listening and watch Epic Archaeology stuff, Dan touched on it just a second ago. He just said this. He's getting in the source material. And one of the things that we have talked about at Epic Archaeology is that we talked about the importance of what we call primary sources. Yep. And really there are essentially, I've simplified this, but basically there are three primary sources for history. It's eyewitnesses. Someone had to have witnessed something or saw something or whatever. There has to be that connection of an eyewitness. Then they had to write something down, and that's history, historical records. And the third primary source is archaeological evidence. Well, when you don't have the eyewitnesses to interview, the only two things you have left are the historical sources and the archaeological evidence. And so what Dan is actually doing, and what he's done with the Quran, is he has taken the primary sources for the early Islamic history, in not only with the Quran, but also with some of the early Muslim writings in the Hadiths. And he's looked at the archaeology to see what the connections are between the historical sources, which were purportedly written by eyewitnesses who saw these events, who witnessed these events, and the archaeological record, and what's the connection between what the Quran says versus what we actually have in the archaeological record. So Dan, continue on. Sorry to interrupt.
I'll just jump in and just say the YouTube, on the YouTube channel, there's about 80 YouTube videos I've done. One series is called Archaeology and Islam. And this is new for Muslims everywhere. Nobody else has done archaeology in Islam. And so coming from a background of archaeology in the Bible, I know I can borrow, because Islam and Christianity overlap a lot, yes, especially with the prophets. And so we do stuff like David and, Isaiah and Solomon and Abraham and Job and other people who you can find reference to in Islam. And so they're very interested in this whole area because they don't have anybody else addressing the topic of archaeology and the religion of Islam. The problem is that this challenges Islamic history, because what they have been told and what has been repeated all the way down for the last 1500 years, what has come out now in the end is a picture of Islam that doesn't match the archaeology. And so that's the challenge they face. I love it when I go to the Bible and it says, Jesus leaving Jerusalem went down to Jericho. I mean, what a beautiful thing of there is actually a road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and actually it does go down and so forth. I mean, the setting is all there. The towns are there. The ruins are there. I can go back and check it. The big problem is when you come to Islamic history, things just don't fit. So let's jump over to the Qibla tool. I'm going to put this up here because what I discovered, there are 4 Qiblas in early Islamic history. So 4 different places where Muslims directed their prayers. The very first 60 years, 70 years of Islamic history, every building that still remains. Now, the problem here, I have a bunch that are called unknown, because what has happened is they have taken a building, and we'll look at those when we get into there, and they have totally bulldozed it to the ground. Maybe back 500 years ago, it was totally demolished and rebuilt because they wanted a bigger one there. And so many of the main sites you can no longer look at because they have been uh, just knocked down and rebuilt and changes made, so I can no longer check the actual sources. So out of that 163 mosques, there are probably 30, 40 of those which we can no longer check because they use in our database, because we cannot check the original building. We can go to the site, but we can't check the actual data. But there are others that still survive. So that's the important thing. Just a question, why is this topic? Because many Christians ask me this, why is the Qibla important? I'd like to say this, just so you catch it, this is a theological thing now, the importance of the Qibla. For a Muslim, it's how he prays. Because Muslims have 2 kinds of prayer. And the most common prayer is the one that you see them doing, bowing down. They do this, some do 3 times a day, some do 5 times a day, some don't pray for a while, and then they try to catch up on their prayers and so forth. Why are they catching up on their prayers? Because the number of times that they repeat, and when they repeat, they're saying the same prayer, they're all going through the same motions. That's why an entire crowd all prays and bows the same, because it's a ritual thing. The number of times you do that then builds up your credit, because they believe there's this great weigh scale, and your works are on one side and your sins are on the other. And so you're trying to balance this weigh scale, and you really don't know how it's going to work out. There is an angel on your right shoulder. There is an angel on your left shoulder. The one on the left shoulder has a book, and he's writing down the bad things. Angel on the right shoulder has a book. He's writing down the good things. The good things you do is not helping a little old lady across the street. That might be maybe mentioned, but it really is, you prayed 5 times today. Check, 5 times, okay? You gave some money to the poor. Check, you gave some money to the poor. You went on a pilgrimage. Oh, that's a big one, that you did this. And so they believe the books will be weighed. That's what it talks about. Not what you do. The books will be weighed at the end. So at the end of their prayer, you see the Muslim goes through all this. He says, Salam alaikum, Salam alaikum. He greets the 2 angels at the end of his prayer time. Did you notice what I just did? Is basically what he's saying. So prayer, if you ended up praying in the wrong direction, or if the prayer has been changed from what Muhammad said to something different, that would null all the prayers of all the Muslims for 1,300 years. And that is unthinkable. It cannot be true for Muslims. They can't accept that something might have been changed. They need to be saying the exact same prayers with the exact same motions that Muhammad taught. And so archaeology has a problem trying to make that connection, and Muslims have a problem because the Quran doesn't tell them how to pray. It doesn't tell them the actions, doesn't even tell them the words. And so that has just come down through tradition. So it affects the pilgrimage. What happens if you're going to the wrong place? What happens if somebody later invented a new place and made everybody go there because the politicians decided that's where they wanted it? So this is huge. And the halal meat, maybe it's not halal because maybe you're facing the wrong direction. Because all the Quran says is you must face Masjid al-Haram. And that's the name of the place. And the question then becomes, where was that place? And did that place move? So with no ado, okay. Let's just going to touch on this before we get to the next one. Circumstantial evidence, just a few I'm just going to throw out. It talks about there's 20 border stones around the haram area. This is the forbidden area. Inside, nothing is allowed to be killed or murdered or anything. People are safe in there. You don't even kill a bird or anything. You don't even cut a tree down. And so there's supposed to be these 20 stones. You can't find them in Saudi Arabia. I discovered when the first Qibla was pointing to a place, and there are 20 huge stones, house-sized stones, square cut, all around this haram area. All the major gods that are mentioned in Islamic history, this is the place in the city of Petra. It has the haram border. It has all the temples are there. The exact ones that are worshipped in the Islamic history are found there. The foundation of the original Kaaba building is there in Petra. It fits the size because the measurements were given. All four sides had slightly different lengths. It wasn't perfectly square or cube. And when we go there, we find a foundation and it exactly fits those dimensions. And all the stopping places in the pilgrimage, when you're supposed to go for this place, they all fit and the measurements all fit, how far it is between them. And then there's all the others, little bits and pieces. An example here, for instance, the Yemenis, where there's a complaint in some of the hadiths because they would leave Yemen, these Muslims going on pilgrimage, they would get as far as Medina and then they have run out of food because they didn't bring enough food, didn't calculate how far it was going to be. And therefore, all these Yemenis were on the streets in Medina begging for money or for food so they could go the rest of the journey. Now, the question is, if you know your geography, you've got, Yemen is here and then Mecca and then Medina is here and Petra is here. Well, if they were going to Mecca, they would never go all the way up to Medina. So what were they doing in the streets of Medina? By the traditional account, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, but actually, if they were going to Petra, then the story makes perfect sense. So I am going to try to change here over to the Qibla tool. We'll bring it up and there it is. I think you can see that on your screen.
Yep.
Okay, so I have a list here and I can categorize. I'll move this out. I have all the known mosques here. I can zoom in and out by just scrolling my mouse and you can see all these places. So if I want to choose the first one, I can do it by category, by age as well, but let me just prove here. Here's the ones that are facing Petra. And they are all facing, and now if you notice here on the right, we're talking about 5 after the Hijrah is the Islamic dates, and then there's a whole bunch more that are just in that time period. But these are mosques that don't face Mecca and Saudi Arabia, they face here. There's over 30 different mosques that face in this direction.
So the Qibla is the direction of prayer, and these are the earliest mosques. You said there's 30 of these?
Yes. Well,
And
there's more than 30. I could count them. I got it written down somewhere.
And
the number keeps changing.
And the Qibla is the prayer niche that Muslims bow down and pray towards.
That's the mihrab. Most of these do not have a mihrab because they predate the making of. There was no need to make a mihrab because there was no question on which wall do you use.
Got you. And so they're all facing Petra, which is in Jordan, not in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca.
That's right.
Wow.
Okay. And when we go there, all the 50 circumstantial things, fit into that location. So that was the big thing that came. Now, what happens next is there was a civil war that took place in the second civil war in Islam. There were a number of civil wars, and suddenly something new happens. Now, the general was sent, because by this time Islam had moved the headquarters from Medina, because it's way down in Saudi Arabia. They were taking over all this land. So now they were in Damascus, because that's the world-class city, and that's where they wanted their capital. And so the general who was sent to the Holy City, because the fight was basically between Damascus and the Holy City, which according to according to the archaeology, it's in Petra. And so, and all the things fit when you read the whole story. You read it, it all makes sense. Everything fits here. Doesn't fit in Mecca and Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia, there's no archaeology at this time. There's nothing they can find that dates back to this time period. So something happens, and the general who destroys Saudi Arabia, now in that, Petra, in that fight, there's a story, Ibn Zubair, who's leading in the holy city. He takes the black rock. He removes it from the Kaaba building because the Kaaba building is getting destroyed. And he puts it on silk and on a wooden stand. And then he rebuilds this Kaaba and this place, and he puts the stone in it. The problem is that what happens is that suddenly some mosques are facing Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So he, by just looking at the timeline, he moved the black rock, as far as I understand, from Petra down to Mecca, getting it away from from Damascus, as far away as he could get it, brought it here. And while it's here, I mean, people all around, oh, the Black Rock, this great idol has shown up. So all of the idol worshiping people come to see it. And eventually it attracts a following, and it never gets moved from this spot. So during the Civil War, the guy who does the battle up here in Petra, the general, he defeats them, okay, but he never goes all the way down to Mecca to get this. He is made the ruler of the eastern half of the Islamic world. So above him is the Caliph. He's the second guy down. He is really a brutal guy. That's how he won the war. So he builds his first mosque, called the Wasset Mosque, which means the between mosque. And he builds it, and he faces Wasset direction. Wasset means between, or between, or the middle. So it's, and he's facing where? Exactly between Petra and Mecca. He doesn't accept Mecca because that's where the rebels took it. He doesn't accept Petra because it no longer has a black rock. And it's a city full of idols, and he was there and he helped destroy the place. Okay, so he wasn't keen on it. So he started this, and during his lifetime, if you look on the right here, you can see the years. I mean, if you want the 706, or you can see 87 after the Hijra. I mean, these all built 1 year after the other, all the way down. And all these mosques that are being built during his lifetime under his control, because he's the top guy next to the Caliph, they're all facing this between position. After he dies, there's only one or two more that are built, just within a few years after his death. And then that position, that Qibla, is abandoned. And so you don't see it anymore. So it only happened during the lifetime of General al-Hajjaj. That's his name. And so that's the between.
Was he Umayyad?
Yes, this is during the Umayyad era.
Okay.
Now it's interesting, right at this time is when the Caliph builds the Dome of the Rock. And what does he do for a Qibla for the Dome of the Rock? Nothing. It's a monument that has no Qibla. Why? Because there's a Qibla war going on, disagreement going on. Some are praying to Mecca, some are praying to the between, some are praying to Petra, and over in the east, because the army has marched to the east, let's back up and look at this. What's going on here?
Wow.
Well, when the army gets partway over here, the general who's leading the army has a disagreement with the people in Damascus, a major disagreement, and they're going to send out a new general and get rid of him. He's in the middle of building his new mosque, okay, with his name on it. And so he has it, and it is facing towards Petra. And so it's there. But what happens is, that halfway through the construction of this mosque, this fight breaks out with Damascus. So he changes the construction of his mosque. Now I need something square. It's hard to know what's square. Maybe I'll just use my binder here. You can't see it. You're looking at this map. Okay, just think of a square. On one side, on the right-hand side, it faces Petra, but he decides then to build his bathrooms there, so that everybody who goes in and uses the bathroom bears their bottoms towards Damascus. Okay, so he reorients it so everyone prays towards the south. And so that's his new Qibla. And you know what it is? It's exactly a line parallel between Petra and Mecca. Wow. So by praying in that direction, you're praying in a line that's it could be Petra, it could be between, it could be Mecca in the south. So very cleverly, he does. Now, if you don't go back and read the history, you read a little bit about this guy building his mosque, and then the general comes and so forth, and they move on. Well, you don't get the whole story till you look at the rocks first.
I have a question, Dan, at this point. What do traditional scholars say the reason why this parallel Qibla direction? What do they say why that is the case? What's the reasoning, and why?
Okay, let's go back and do it historically. So the first generation of Muslims had, well, the first couple generations of Muslims, I'm going to put these up as all known. Mosques look like this. Now, you can understand there's a bit of confusion. Like, what direction were those people praying in? And so during the following years, because eventually Petra is forgotten. Now, and it all switches to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Everything is, the word Mecca is used for everything. Even the stories of Petra, it's all called Mecca because it's just, they've whitewashed their history and everything. And we can talk about how that switch happened and everything. That's another whole topic, very interesting.
And it's an Arabic word, Dan, if I remember correctly from the film. It's an Arabic word that's really easy to change with just a swipe. Is it Becca?
Well, from Becca to Mecca.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it because we have now found one of these circumstantial evidence. Some early Christian writers who refer to Mecca, the Mecca, they say, which is in Paran. And where is Paran? It is in southern Jordan and southern Sinai. This is the deserts up there. And another writer who says, yeah, the Muslim armies came out of Paran, and that's where they originated. So so I believe that Mecca was probably a term used. Maybe it was a suburb of Petra. There is a paper. We're just trying to get it published. It's very hard to get academic journals to accept a paper that that supports a revisionist theory. And so we're really battling this one. But it talks about the names of Petra, because when you go to Petra through those, look through the eyes of history, it has many, many names. It's Mount Seir in the Bible. It has many different names. And when you get to the Petra Scrolls, it is called the mother of all settlements, which is what it's called in the Quran. And so it's got many of the same names that the Quran uses are being used at that time in Petra. Another scholar is just coming out and saying, you know, we've always wondered where the Arabic in the Quran came from, because it's different from all of these dialects all over the place. But when he started studying the Petra Scrolls written in Greek, but there's a lot of stuff because the people all spoke Arabic. And so a lot of stuff is written down in Greek, but they're writing Arabic in Greek. And he said, you know what? This is the language of the Quran, the constructive state. It's called Idafi, the constructive state that is unique to the Quran and to classical Arabic, originated in Petra. So there's lots of these things. So, so by later on, now I've got way ahead of myself, you ask the question, what did they think? By the Middle Ages, so by 300 or 400 years later, after Petra had been forgotten, the history, they had moved on, everything was in Mecca, they were wondering how could these Qiblas face all these different directions? And so some of the people, some of them as late as the 10th, 11th century, where these mathematicians came along and they had worked out ways of finding the Qibla direction using the, a curvature of the earth and the stars and everything. Very clever. That's what drove mathematics in many ways, is they needed to solve some of these problems in their religion. And so mathematics was the way that came to do it. There was a fight at first because the traditionalists didn't want to accept what these mathematicians were saying, but the mathematicians won the day. And now we can really tell. And so mosques all get properly oriented. So the question was, what happened in those early days? And this is where they began to say, this is al-Baldawi in the 10th century and others saying, well, they must have gone to Mecca and copied something that they saw in Mecca as they were there, and went home and just copied that into their mosque. That's what they did. And so they were happy to pray in the direction of something that was similar to Mecca. That's what he proposed. And he said they were just dumb. They were ignorant. They didn't understand how to find. And now he talks about the sweet smell of arithmetic, the sweet smell of geometry and being able to use algebra to solve these equations. And so that was his argument. That idea was picked up back in the 1950s, 60s by a scholar by the name of David King, who then went around and became the Qibla expert for many experts up till now. He's now retired. He must be in his 80s, or and so and he picked up that idea from the medieval scholars, and he has. You'll find it in all of the scholarly writings that they really were just picking up things. In some places, he said they just took the nearest street angle and did things. And so he has, used this. But when he
So they
saw
were.
this,
So
he
they were.
challenged me, and I challenged him, how many mosques did you visit? And he said one in Samarkand. He's
Oh,
only actually seen one mosque. Otherwise, he's just repeating what the 10th century Muslims are saying, and they're already 500 years late on the scene of what really happened. And so I'm going back to the archaeology and saying, look, these must tell a different story. Go ahead.
so what the medieval scholars and what David King, what they're saying, these scholars who disagree with your theory, is that and the reason why the Qibla directions are the way they are is that it was sort of like dead reckoning. They were not really precise, and it wasn't until mathematics and algebra until they were able to be precise. And so, but you found, it's one thing to find one or two, but when you find dozens and perhaps over 30,
Over
then
30 of each one of these, yeah.
so Dan, and I know we're sort of getting toward the end here, but did Muslims? I mean, my understanding is that they were pretty sharp, and they could navigate very, very well, and even before the invention of mathematics. And did you get into some of that in your book? And what are some of the evidence that they actually did know exactly what they were pointing to?
We touched on it in the book. There are a number of scholarly papers who have come out. I've got one listed on the website where you can go, where they take the mathematics. What are the chances that we could see these patterns? Because David King says, I don't believe the patterns exist. You're just seeing this. And so I look at it and say, they seem to be pretty clear. And so they've looked at it from a statistical point of view. The chances of this happening are just completely astronomical.
Yeah.
That you would get 30 mosques all facing in this wonder, and then these over here and those over there, because this is the first time you are looking at something, the first time that people have ever seen the world's first Qiblas mapped on a chart.
Wow.
And it doesn't take a scholar to do this. It doesn't take a world expert to do this. Anybody now, because we have GPS units and we have airplanes. We can fly to these places. We also have satellite pictures. So some of them I've had to go over and look at it. Some of them I've had to send people there to go check it out. Many of them I've gone to myself, and we can look at these. Some of them I rely on the archaeological reports, if there's been a dig there, and what have they come up with, and they've drawn things, and they've worked out scales and so forth, and can work out the Qibla direction.
Some of our listeners may go, well, that's great, Dan. You're using satellites and everything, but let me remind people that back in 2016, I think it was, the TED Prize was given to an Egyptologist named Sarah Parchek, and she started something called Global Explorer, which explores archaeological sites from space, and she considers herself a space archaeologist. So right. That is a legitimate way to study historical sites today. Because you can actually track looting at a site, and she has discovered actually new sites in Egypt in the Nile Delta. So, Dan, let me ask you a question here at this point.
We didn't quite finish before. Just wanted to say, David King's whole thing was the Muslims of the early days were ignorant, and so I've turned around and responded. Are you saying the Quran? In the Quran, Allah commands the people to face Masjid al-Haram. He's giving them a command of something they are unable to do. And for the next 150 years or so, they're just sort of scattered all over, not being able to do it correctly. Or are they able? And so David King has responded back and saying, well, prove to me that they could do it. So there is a series on the YouTube channel called what is it, Navigation in the Qibla, or the Qibla Navigation, I forget which one, and it's a series of 6 or 7 videos, and you can go through that, and we very clearly explain how they did this, and then we show from some manuscripts how this method is actually mentioned in manuscripts, and what the issues were. There were some problems, so the farther you got east or west, the more inaccurate you became, but for that whole Middle Eastern area, you were actually very accurate, and the data shows that.
Very cool. Very cool. So in the if people go to the website nabatea.net, which you can see on the screen there, you can look at this Qibla device. What do you call it?
The Qibla tool. So you're going to
Qibla
click on
tool.
explore. There's over 1,000 pages in this website. So you could get lost, but
Oh,
you're going to click on explore because that's all the stuff about history. And you're going to go down and you're going to look at the founding of Islam. There's that title there. And once you open that up, then you get all the different stuff about the founding of Islam. You can also directly go to the cinema at the top of the page, and you can go down and you can explore all the different films that we have, and also some other interesting ones that I've got from other places. And eventually you're going to start seeing some epic archaeology ones in the
great.
cinema as well. And we will put those there. And we just link to the YouTube page, and so people can go and see those.
Excellent.
The travel actually takes you down the Hejaz Railway that starts in Damascus and goes all the way down to Medina. Every station stop, steam train pictures from the 1800s. Oh, there's just a ton of stuff under there. If you're a train enthusiast and want to know about trains in the Middle East, that's the place to go to.
Awesome.
And there's some books you can click on shop, and you can go and pick up some of my books that are there, some other books. So that's nabatea.net.
That is excellent. And let me say a word to our Muslim friends. We do have some Muslim friends who watch and listen to Epic Archaeology. It was never my intention, or I don't think it's Dan's intention, to be insulting to Islam or anything like that. In any case, as Dan, I'm sure, has, and I have many very dear Muslim friends in Turkey and the Middle East who I love and care about as very dear friends. But we do want to encourage you to evaluate some of the things that he is saying and think about, do the research yourself, and explore your own faith as we do ours in Christianity. We look at, I think as Christians, we need to ask the hard questions. Is there any historical evidence that the Exodus happened? Is there any historical evidence that Abraham existed? These are questions that are important to me personally. As a Christian, I want to know if these things are true, because in Christianity, history and faith are intimately linked together. And in fact, in Christianity, our central claim is that Jesus historically rose again from the dead. That story about the resurrection is mitigated to us 2,000 years before or after in the scripture, in the New Testament, or the Injil. We want to know, is the Injil historically accurate? And so I think as Muslims, I think you would want to know also if the Quran is historically accurate as well, because that is an essential part of your faith as a Muslim. But Dan, let me ask you a couple other kind of follow-up questions. And
Can I just jump in and show one
please,
thing? Because we forgot to just explain a bit about the tool.
please,
On the right-hand side, I can pick out one of these. For instance, the dome of the chain is right here. And
cool.
so if I double click on it, it will take me right down in satellite pictures
Cool.
to the dome of the chain. And here you can see the black line on the right bottom here. It says to Jerusalem, and it gives the direction. Petra, it gives the direction. Now the dome, and so forth. Now the dome of the chain is that little thing outside of the dome of the rock. So if I want more info, I can click on more info, and it will open up a web page on the dome of the chain. And so you can see it looks like a small dome of the rock. Here you see the dome of the rock behind and the dome of the chain in front. And down here you see the Qibla, the mihrab on the side of it. And that's the mihrab we're talking about. Okay, and so when I go back here, that mihrab faces Petra in Jordan. So you can go through each.
Cool.
Now let me go to the Kaaba building itself in Mecca. Okay, now I can go down because the Kaaba direction, it has direction itself because it has a curve on the front of it. And so that whole building is facing where? Petra in Jordan itself. So you can go around and pick out all different kinds. I can go to Jerash in Jordan, and here's the mosque. Now notice it does not match the Roman street. So when they find one over in Cordoba that is similar to the Roman street, Dr. King says, they just picked the Roman street as their Qibla. No, they didn't. Look at this Roman street. They didn't even get close to aligning up. They had a different direction. And where is it? It's facing. The red line is Petra. There's the between, and there's Mecca, and there's Jerusalem. It's closest to Petra. It's very close. If you come over here, you can see Petra. It is within 5 degrees of Petra. Now, Dr. King says, well, maybe they face the solstice. So you can click on there. The blue lines give you the solstices. It really has nothing to do with the solstice, as does any of them. And the Petra circle method is how they would have used that method that we describe in the video. And if they use that, it would have shown here. So it actually moves, the Petra circle would have been much closer to where that Qibla is set today. So if they were using the Petra circle, you can see that little red one, that explains why that Qibla points where it was. Because they weren't using a GPS, they were using something called what we later called the Indian circle. It gives this Qibla, that's why it points off of Petra a little bit, because of the tool that they were using. So it's all there. You can go through all of these. You can search them by ages, during the Umayyad age, during Uthman's their age when they were built, during the Second Civil War, and then during the Abbasid era, and then here's a whole bunch of these that were built. So that just gives you an idea of where we wanted to go to all known. Okay. If I can make it work, that's a good question. Oh yeah, it does. I just have to zoom out. It's doing the right thing. I was just zoomed in on one mosque.
So people don't, even if they're a little skeptical, Dan, of your theory, they can get on this Qibla tool and they can do the research themselves. So
that's right. And the map underneath it's just Google Maps. So I'm not manipulating the maps in any way. And it's all done mathematically. All we do is give the direction of that building, how it faces, having visited there or collected that data, and then the rest of it just automatically fills in for us where all these other places are. And it's using a spherical Earth. It's not using Google Earth doesn't use a flat map, as many people have argued. It's actually using a spherical Earth. And then you can compare the ancient method with the today's method, and looking at it and seeing what happens.
Very good.
Oh, one last, just a thing to mention.
Yes.
Some of this changes because this is the latest data. So some people say, where's China? Because it's not here. China is under the unknown. So if I go to the unknown ones, then you will see one here in China and you will see where it goes. Because China, the problem is dating that mosque, and we go back and see that actual building dates to the 1500s. The original mosque is underneath that. I think it had the same Qibla, but I cannot prove it. Therefore, it is unknown. So some of the mosques, this mosque was said in Quranic geography, we said this faces to Petra because it is way closer to Petra than to here. It actually maybe faces between position, because when I wrote Quranic geography, I didn't even know there was a between position. We had only 30 mosques to work with. Okay, now we have so many more. The whole story is coming clear. So there are some on here which have changed. I've just changed the classification and said, look, we originally said that was a Petra mosque. Now we're saying it's unknown because really we can't date that exact building. So there was a few changes that were made, but out of all of those mosques, those are the unknown ones that we haven't been able to date.
So it's continually being researched, updated as new evidence comes in and comes forward.
And new mosques being added.
Exactly. So David, not David, excuse me. Sorry about that.
That's David King. No,
David King. So Dan,
I'm Dan.
I'm very sorry, Dan. If you wouldn't mind, if you would for our audience summarize so far, just give us a summary of what you're saying. Basically, is that
can I stop sharing screen?
Yes, you sure can. Just go down to the bottom. You can go exit. You hit your exit button. And then you can click on the share screen again, and you can go stop sharing. Do that.
I don't know where that.
If you hit exit on your computer or escape.
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 Maybe I need to. Oh, there it is. You are screen sharing. Stop sharing. Thank you. There we go.
Very good. Yes.
Okay. What do you want me to in closing?
Just in closing, if you wouldn't mind, just summarize basically what you're saying is, and if I'm I guess just for laymen who maybe not studied Islam, lay Christians who know a little bit about it, what Dan and I have been discussing, what Dan has been explaining is the earliest history of Islam which typically states that Muhammad, the prophet who founded Islam, was born in Mecca, and that one of the key faith um, practices in Islam is to pray toward Mecca. But what Dan has discovered is that
Excuse me.
bless you, these earliest mosques actually do not point to Mecca. They point to Petra, which is in Jordan. And by the way, if you don't know what Petra is, it's also the place where they filmed Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the last part of that. But just for a little cultural reference. But Dan, that's what you're saying, correct?
That's right. And I believe Muhammad was born and raised in Petra. That Petra was originally called Mecca, or at least a sub part of Petra. They're finding the Islamic city is moreover near the area called Al-Baida, which appears in Islamic history as well. It's between Petra and Al-Baida. Al-Baida is not that far away. So it's only about 4 or 5 kilometers outside of Petra. The very core of Petra is where the whole Islamic town was later. And actually you find a lot of stuff there that fits exactly into the story of Islam. So I think the whole thing, Muhammad born there, raised there, there were Christians there, he interacted with them. Eusebius says that the city of Petra was full of heretics, all kinds of people who in the Roman Empire, and as Christians were coming up to being more powerful, they expelled a bunch of heretics. They all tended to find their way down to Petra. And so that's the basis of where Muhammad was born. There were all these different Christian groups in part of the city. We point out that all the churches and everything are only in 1/4 of the city. The rest of it was pagan. And so this is a divided city. And and then when the Hijrah took place, after Muhammad was preaching, and everybody persecuted him. The pagans persecuted him, the Christians persecuted him, the Jews persecuted him. So then he and his followers, they first of all tried going to Ethiopia, didn't work out very well. So they ended up all moving down to Medina. That was the Hijrah. It was south, moving south to Medina. And then in Medina is where Islam grew, and then the armies marched north again up, and the big battle was in Muta up in Jordan, and that's where Islam really started to expand. So the whole thing is we're looking now at Petra rather than Mecca. Mecca, there's no archaeological evidence for it at this period of time or previous to this period of time. It doesn't come into play till the Second Civil War, and it is a barren valley. When the rock is brought there, the people bring it down to hide it away, but eventually all around people in other surrounding areas are coming there, and eventually it stays there. The pilgrimage is built there. The well that was there becomes known as the Well of Zamzam, and so forth. And so we look at all these questions. Where was Zamzam and how did it move, and all the things that are involved. So that's the narrative that we look at.
That's so fascinating. I got to ask you, Dan, and obviously you can't share any names, but have there been Muslims that you have spoken with that have given them pause? This information has given them pause, and they've told you privately that they think you might be right?
It's interesting, on the YouTube videos, I get a bunch of flack from Muslims who are just passing by and pick up something. And
Sure.
the emails I get all kinds of emails, and I would say 90% of them are very positive.
Wow.
A lot of Muslims who look at this data, and some I just got an email this morning from a guy from Pakistan who then decided to go to Petra, and he walked all around the area and he looked at it and he said, "I disagree with what you say about Ghadir Khum." I said, "I think I found where it actually is," and so he's relating at that. There's been scholars from other places who have gone to, Muslim scholars who have gone there and have checked out these things. And so I am getting a lot of emails from people who are wrestling with this now, because the evidence, they say, okay, I agree. The evidence all says Petra. Both the archaeology does, all the circumstantial evidence fits, it can fit this narrative. It might also fit the Mecca narrative, but the stones back up this, and the narrative fits up here. And so they're wrestling to try to fit it together. It's interesting to see because there's different reactions to that. Some of people that are working hard. So there's a group of Muslims now who are now praying towards Petra and
Wow.
want to go on pilgrimage to Petra. So, I mean, there's that group. There are people who have um, decided that if there is such a major error in Islam, they're just going to abandon Islam and they walk away.
Wow.
Many of them become atheists. There are also quite a number of Muslims who look at this data and then realize there is something really wrong here. And they begin to explore other websites, other people, and are saying and listening to what Christians are saying and who have found Christ as their savior. And so this has been the thing that has got them thinking. And that's all I'm trying to do. If I can just get you to think, just please go back, read Al-Tabri's histories, okay? Read the Hadiths, read Bukhari, read these guys, because when you read them, you will begin to realize what they are saying contradicts sometimes themselves. In Bukhari says Muhammad prayed north. He said that Muhammad, before the Qibla was changed, he says Muhammad prayed to Jerusalem in one place. Another place he says he prayed to Asham, which is Damascus. Other places he's just praying north and whatever. So how do you fit all these things together? Because it's not clear. You read Al-Tabari and he'll have on one page 10 arguments of why Abraham took Ishmael to the top of the mountain. And then you turn the page and he'll give you 10 arguments of why it was Isaac. Okay,
Yeah.
and you realize these guys are reporting, some of them are trying to be quite truthful. They are reporting what is being said, but there is a lot of conflict going on. And what did Muhammad actually say and do? For instance, there are hadiths there that were thrown away, and Bukhari and others, they discarded them because it said Muhammad was preaching in a Roman bathhouse.
Mm.
Okay, and he was actually in the Roman bathhouse preaching. Well, they threw those away because there never was a Roman bathhouse in Mecca. Well, you go to Petra and you go to where that original Kaaba foundation is, just outside of the great temple of Dushera and Hubal there. And right next door is what? A Roman bathhouse. I was delighted when they dug it up and they decided this is a bathhouse. I'm going, it's a bathhouse because that just fits. But all those sermons were tossed by the Abbasids who said it can't be true. And we lost them. We don't have the sermon. We just have record that there were sermons preached in a bathhouse and they couldn't have been right. And so they were all discarded and lost in time. And so what happened is later Muslims were editing earlier history, and we find that over and over again. I mean, you get Ibn Hisham comes along and he edits the earliest writings before him of Ibn Ishaq, and we don't have Ibn Ishaq anymore. We just have Ibn Hisham. And so, we have to try to figure out what these early people said, because later writers were editing what earlier writers said, because they say there's grievous errors in there. And there were, because they were talking, maybe even mentioned Petra by name, who knows. But I mean, they had to edit these things down to give us the pure scripture we have today. The problem is those pure hadiths and the trustworthy one, they don't fit the archaeological evidence. And so we have to go back and get that first story. What was really going on in Arabia in 1400? And if it's not true, what else got changed? And if you go back and read, you'll find that there's a story there of I think it's Walid, who's the Caliph, and he's going down and he meets this old man who's weeping in the mosque, and he recognizes him. He's one of the companions of the Prophet, because Hajjaj killed all the companions of the Prophet that he could find because they disagreed with him, and he just up and found excuses to kill every one of them. And this guy survived, and they said, "Why are you weeping?" And he said, "Because you've changed everything in Islam."
Wow.
And then the Caliph says to him, "But the prayer is the same." And he said, "No, you've even changed the prayers."
Wow.
Wow.
So a lot.
That's a hadith.
Yeah.
That's written in the accounts. So things have been changed. So when Muslims read that and begin to realize, what do I trust? And so some have come and they've become the Quran only. I only trust the Quran. Well, they need to then start looking what David Brubaker and others are doing and going back to those early manuscripts of the Quran, because even those change and are different over time. That's so different than when I go back and read my Bible. The archaeology fits, the stories of the fathers that they told afterwards fit, and we can go back and we can trust this book called the Bible. And I've discovered that both archaeologically and theologically and personally in my life as well. And so I'm urging Christians, Muslims everywhere, please check out your original sources. Please go back and check if this stuff is true.
That's right. That's exactly right. Dan. I cannot thank you enough for your work and what you're doing now, and the books that you've written and the videos you've produced, and just this remarkable information that you have discovered historically and archaeologically, and how the archaeology actually dovetails perfectly with the things that you're saying. You're not, it's one thing, just like you said earlier, to say something. Anybody can make a claim, but if the archaeology actually is saying exactly what you're saying, then you've got evidence to back up what you're saying. So again, I would encourage folks to check out your website, David. I keep calling you David. Dan's website. Dan's website is Nabataeans.net. And you have seen it earlier. We're going to put all the links, by the way. Those of you who are watching this on YouTube, this is also going to be on the podcast as well. If you are listening just in the audio, then I would encourage you to check out the YouTube, because Dan did share some really amazing slides that you can actually see and follow along with the argument and with the data. With the historical research that he's done. You can check out his website. There are many articles on the website. There are articles and videos actually responding to David King and some of the criticisms that Professor King has made against Dan's theories and ideas. But again, we just encourage people to make their own mind up about this, and do the research yourself, and investigate these ideas. Search your heart. Look at the resources, look at the primary sources, and ask God to open your eyes to show you the truth. And that is our hope and prayer. But Dan, thank you so much, very much for coming on Monocle Spade. It was such an honor to have you today on the podcast.
I've enjoyed being here. Watch for a new film. One of the things we want to do in the coming year or two is put together a sequel to The Sacred City, because so much has come out since we made that film. And so hopefully, the Lord willing, if the funds come in, we will we'll have a new film out within a year or two that will present all this in a nice 90-minute package.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. It's going to be awesome. For Monocle Spade, I'm Ted Wright, your host, the founder and executive director of epicarchaeology.org. I want to thank you guys for listening and watching Monocle Spade podcast. If you have not subscribed on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, put some comments in the comment section, and also hit that bell so you can get the latest updates from Monocle Spade. But again, thank you so much for watching the Monocle Spade, the podcast of Epic Archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. You guys, I hope you have a great day, and God bless. We'll talk to you later.